Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia, and the Philippines. Sorry, I'll turn off my Zoom. This seminar is organized in a hybrid method. So we have live streaming through YouTube. We also have two of our speakers here joining in from Canberra, Australia, as well as Diliman in the Philippines. This panel is organized by the ARC-UI and the Center for Political Studies, Puskapol, and the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Indonesia. And it's part of our efforts to support the pro-democratic agenda, in which one of the aspects of our roadmap for the next 5 years under the current Dean Semiarto Aji is about democratic resilience. We thank the faculty for supporting and making this panel possible. And without further ado, we'd like to invite the Dean, Pak Aji, to give us a welcoming remark for our organizing committee. Maulana, could you please invite the Dean to open the session?
Issues. Our Faculty of Social and Political Science in this university has just released the roadmap for research and research cluster development in the year of 2022 to 2024. And among of these three interdisciplinary clusters that we aim to develop is the cluster on democratic accountability and resilience. We hope that this event will further trigger internal and international collaboration in understanding the complex issues of democracy and democratization in Indonesia and beyond. And I do hope that this discussion will be fruitful, not only in providing insight, but also inspiration for action. Thank you. Have a very fruitful discussion. Happy discussing.
The Dean is today giving a keynote speech for the 25th commemoration of the Reformasi movement in Indonesia. It ended the authoritarian regime in 1998, which signified Indonesia's transition into democracy, which we are still supporting very actively until today, with what the Dean has mentioned as stagnation that is not only happening in Indonesia, but much throughout the region. I will open this session, which we will have 4 speakers, in which we will have 4 speakers. And I would like to begin the session by congratulating the Move Forward Party that successfully went against the military government and hopefully bringing in more and stronger democracy into Thailand. We have counterparts as well in the Asia Research Center working on the issues. So we treat them as our allies, friends, and colleagues, banding together to strengthen civil society and democratic transition and processes in the region. The four speakers that we have today are Dr. Ross Tapsell, who will be joining us through Zoom. Ross is a senior lecturer at the Australian National University. He's recently wrote a book chapter on the role of video campaigning in Malaysia's elections. Ross, can you hear my voice clearly?
Yes, thank you, Anaya. I can hear you well.
Okay, I will give you 15 minutes for your presentation. Time and place is yours.
Thank you, except the host has disabled screen sharing. So if you could just let me share my screen. Lovely to see you all there at UI. I'd love to visit again sometime. Looks like a beautiful room. Is that the Ruang Rector or something there? It looks spectacular. I've just returned from Malaysia after being there for the campaign in November 2022. So I've got lots of material to show you and some thoughts on how the Malaysian election can connect to the Indonesian election, which is forthcoming, of course. Okay, thank you very much. Yes. And click. And I presume that's all okay, but do yell out if there's a drama and you can't see my screen or hear me at any point. So yes, this is from my research on the ground there during and there's a bit of a road trip that I did through Peninsular Malaysia. It was a fascinating election. It was as fun as ever. It's actually my third Malaysian election that I've been to. And it was really the most exciting one because you had more parties, you had more candidates, there were more media outlets, many of which were trying to cover more political parties now. There were more social media platforms. It wasn't just about Facebook or WhatsApp. TikTok was a new player on the scene, as we'll hear, and a greater diversity of voices. So a really fascinating campaign. There were three coalitions that were part of or looking to win over the parliament, the government. Let me just put that down so you can see a bit better. Okay. The first is the Anwar Ibrahim-led Pakatan Harapan on the left there, a coalition which has pushed for a more democratic and pluralistic Malaysia, but which has suffered from tremendous infighting and dysfunctionality since it won the election in 2018. The second coalition was the Muhyiddin Yassin-led Perikatan Nasional, a new coalition formed for this campaign, which at its core believes in keeping the special rights of Malays and Islam, with Muhyiddin's Bersatu party joining with PAS, the Islamic party. The third and final coalition is one which has long dominated governance since the foundation of Malaysia, the Barisan Nasional, which after being ousted spectacularly in 2018, managed to get back into power in 2021, with Ismail Sabri becoming Prime Minister. He dissolved Parliament in October 22 under pressure from his party president, Zahid Hamidi, who's also there in the picture dressed in blue, who was facing corruption charges and feared going to jail, much like former PM Najib Razak. So who was actually the prime ministerial candidate from the Barisan Nasional? It wasn't really clear. And immediately the two other coalitions started their campaigns in this narrative. Malaysians must vote out the Barisan Nasional because Zahid is corrupt and wants to be the prime minister in order to keep himself out of jail. If you replace Najib with Zahid in 2022, and you have a very similar election narrative from the last campaign. There are a couple of really important key features that I want to point out that made this election unique. The first was that for the first time in Malaysia, 18-year-olds to 21-year-olds were allowed to vote. It had gone through the constitution, all parties had voted on it, Parliament had passed it, And so this is a very exciting time for youth vote in Malaysia, but it also meant there was a lot of uncertainty around who the youth would vote for. Would they just follow their parents? Would they be influenced by social media? Would they not vote at all? It was something that we're really trying to understand. The three coalitions meant that it was a three-corner fight, which meant we didn't know who was going to win, which is a good thing. And it meant that the campaign really mattered. This was not an election which you sort of knew what was going to happen, which was sort of the case in the Philippines, for example. We weren't sure who was going to win, and a good campaign could win you or lose your election. It was the freest campaign for the Malaysian media that I've ever seen, and possibly in Malaysia's history. And many issues were open for discussion: corruption, race, religion. There was no longer an anti-fake news law in Malaysia, which meant that people felt that they could post online much more freely than they could in previous elections. And finally, it was a snap election. Unlike Indonesia, where it's well planned in advance, 5 years, when the date is. Malaysia, they just call the election, dissolve parliament, and you only have a short 1 month, roughly sort of campaign period, in which people are scrambling to form coalitions, but also to get their campaign teams in order. And so what that really meant was it was hard to have campaign on strong policy difference. For the most part, the messaging was around race and religious issues. And if it wasn't about that, it was really about some vacuous narrative over who was the scarier choice as Malaysia's Prime Minister. In this presentation, I want to talk to you a little bit about what I saw on the ground, which was this new technique that dominated social media campaigning in GE15. And that was this urgent desire and exponential growth in video content. We saw this massification of video campaign material spreading on social media platforms. And this is really down to this rise of video stories that we're seeing on Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts, and this increasing feature of social media to move a trend away from written or photographic or even memes, mimetic content, and towards video. So more and more Malaysians have the bandwidth to access this kind of video, and more Malaysian political parties were paying people to film them on all the time. And finally, TikTok, a platform which is exclusively for short-term video content, was seen as crucial to winning over younger voters. So we saw this live streaming of candidates conducting ceramah or various events on social media constantly being put onto social media. It further exemplified a very open, transparent campaign, but the end result was, put simply, a lot of social media video content, including on TikTok. Here's an example of one video that got about 50 million views on TikTok by Muhyiddin Yassin. Sorry, there we go. Right, so as you're watching that, you're probably thinking, well, there's not a lot to that, but this is sort of the nature of video campaigning on TikTok, right? And so you'd be partly right. Some of it is really frivolous. Some of it, there's not a lot of substance, but these are the kind of things that get people thinking about politics, particularly younger people, to vote for a particular party. However, it wasn't all about this kind of frivolous content. Two videos in particular seemed to cut through to shape the nature of the campaign. One was Zahid Hamidi's speech at a Congress early on in the campaign, where he said the Barisan Nasional must win to prevent selective acts of prosecution. The recording of the speech was widely shared online and covered extensively by Malaysian news outlets, even the ones seen as favourable to the BN. The speech gave the impression that the only reason Zahid wanted an election was to avoid his own prosecution for corruption. Here's the video that I'm talking about.
Pilihan raya kali ini is mother of all general election. Kalau kita kecundang, nasib kita lebih buruk daripada PRU ke-14. Bukan saya sahaja kena charge. Tomat? Tomat? You are in the waiting list. Tan Sri Vicky, don't laugh. You are also included. What more, Dato' Sri Saravanan? Kasya? They won't forget you. You'll be charged as well. Isham, you don't smile. Bagi mengelakkan ini, kita wajib menang dengan dominan di dalam pilihan raya umum ke-15 ini, saudara-saudari.
Okay, so for many, this exemplified the concern that they had about voting in for the BN and tapped into voter anger about 2018 election, but also about Zahid's unpopularity generally. From this point, we saw the Barisan Nasional decline in the polls and continued to decline throughout the campaign, seemingly unable to overcome the anti-Zahid message of this negative campaign that the only reason they wanted to be elected was to stay out of jail. The second and most important video I want to show you was an edited video of Perikatan Nasional leader Muhyiddin Yassin, which we can now watch a news report which has English subtitles. No, we can't. Okay, that's all right. These videos, again, were showing negative content, which were likely to spread online, especially if the material was party leaders saying something controversial. Opposition campaigners spread the video in order to enrage voters, both against Zahid Hamidi and in this one, it's against Muhyiddin Yassin, which believed that the respective videos were being twisted. But at the same time, what really happened here was the videos exemplified a more transparent public sphere. And in speeches which might have previously been given to only a select and favorable audience, suddenly becomes part of the national narrative. Comments around race and religion and identity and corruption were now broadcast online and replayed on numerous social media platforms, online news sites, talkback radio, and so on. So the topic of race and religion became the central narrative around this campaign, and whether a pro-Islamist nativist party that is basically campaigning largely on the rights of Malays was going to be a danger for Malaysia, or whether this is the trend that Malaysia is heading towards. The result was a stunning loss for the Zahid-led Barisan Nasional, and for UMNO in particular, winning only 26 seats. This was the worst result of Malaysia's former powerful ruling party in its history. No one was able to form a majority, but the biggest winners was the Islamic party PAS, where the Perikatan Nasional won 73 parliamentary seats, 49 of which were won by PAS, meaning they won the most seats of any party in GE15. The second was the traditionally Malaysian Chinese party of the DAP, which is seen as like a polar opposite to PAS, feeling like we're heading towards a much more polarized Malaysia. But the initial question everybody wanted answered was, why was the Perikatan Nasional, or the Islamist campaign, so successful? And so the answer that people immediately would give was it was TikTok, which enabled a green wave, because PAS's flag is green for Islam. And these strategies involved tapping on celebrities and youth influencers with types of content that included live stream, celebrity endorsements, and other videos. So there's little doubt that the success of PAS was enabled by a more professionalized social media strategy linked to their extensive grassroots networks, WhatsApp groups, preachers, and other youth supporters, and significant social media presence. While maintaining that the Barisan Nasional was corrupt, the PAS and PN created a picture that the Anwar Ibrahim-led coalition was an archenemy to Muslim Malay voters. And early on in the campaign, Hadi Awang, the leader of PAS, posted on social media a meme that predominantly the Malaysian Chinese Party DAP was pro-communist, alleging that communists terrorize more than the Christian and Jewish colonizers. Messages that Pakatan Harapan was dominated by DAP continued, and any remarks about Islam or Malay language or Malay royalty by the DAP were a staple diet of negative campaigning in PN. So in contrast, the youth party, Muda, and we've just seen huge success in Thailand with the youth party. In contrast, the youth party in Malaysia, who claimed social media as their strength, failed to resonate. A former campaign manager told me after the election that it was hard to think of a single video of impactful content on the youth party's GE15 campaign. She said, "I was surprised how little traction we had. Most of our TikTok videos only had 200 views a day, while PAS had thousands of views and comments. And the youth party won only one seat." So it's not saying that all of this content was problematic, but it does make us think about how we can imagine the role of social media campaigning and the professionalization of social media campaigning in Malaysia. The aftermath, though, as I said, no one could reach a majority. So it was up to the Anwar Ibrahim party to form an alliance with the previously defeated Barisan Nasional and to form a partnership in government with Zahid Hamidi, who became Deputy Prime Minister. As a result, the Perikatan Nasional formed an opposition coalition, of which they are now even naming an opposition cabinet, which is really the first time this has happened in Malaysia, even though it's not officially an opposition cabinet. It's essentially what they're doing. So this is, in a way, exciting times, but a few big questions remain as my final slide here as I look to conclude. The first is, how significant is the success of the Islamist Malay nationalist campaign? Is this something we will see in Indonesia if we look at a campaign that will be based around race and religion, and Islam in particular? Or are there many other reasons why people would vote for PAS? For example, they didn't like the Barisan Nasional. Young people voted the way that their parents voted. PAS was cool and had a more interesting TikTok campaign. So are we seeing a green wave that is going to last, is the question. Secondly, can Anwar's government last? Because Malaysian parliamentarians have tended to jump ship and they've brought in new laws around this, but if it doesn't go well, our party's going to jump. The Barisan Nasional and UMNO, the former ruling party, which ruled electoral authoritarian Malaysia for 50 years, has been soundly rejected, but it remains key to government. And as they're finding out in Thailand, this is going to be very interesting when rejected groups are seemingly crucial to government. Finally, that important question, does G15 show that Malaysia is becoming more democratic? And overall, my answer to that question, at least in the media sphere, is yes, it is. And ultimately, this is a good thing. Thanks very much and look forward to hearing what other people present and have to say.
Thank you so much, Ross. One of the key points I think that your presentation contributed to this discussion is the expanding social basis of young people, 18 until 35-year-old, who are increasingly becoming political on social media, campaigning for or against an elite that is either part or challenging the current incumbent. This is a phenomenon that is widespread not only in Southeast Asia, but also globally. What has been held by many economists as a demographic bonus, a generation of people with upward mobility aspirations and wanting a country and a government that is more open, more democratic, more participatory, which has been much of the advocacy and struggles that Sam Rainsy, economist and former Minister of Finance in 1993 to 1994 in Cambodia, forming the Sam Rainsy Party in coalition and turned into the National Rescue Party in Cambodia, who have been fighting for the rights of freedom of expression, gender equality, and universal healthcare and social care, which is many of the values of the expanding middle class of young people in Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, as well as the larger Southeast Asia. For Mr. Sam Rainsy, time and place is yours. You have 15 minutes. Thank you.
I would like to thank the Kurawal Foundation and the University of Indonesia, the Department of Socio-Political Affairs, for organizing this meeting. I would like to thank all the participants for their interest in Cambodia. Before talking about the current situation in Cambodia and its future, I would like to remind you of the close relationship that Indonesia and Cambodia have had over the last, say, 70 years. Modern Cambodia engaged with modern Indonesia under President Sukarno. In 1995, the Bandung Conference assembled representatives of the first non-aligned movement, and very prominent leaders came to Bandung, including King Norodom Sihanouk from Cambodia. So Sukarno and King Norodom Sihanouk established very good relation, the basis of modern Indonesia and modern Cambodia. And Indonesia played another very important role in the 1980s, leading to the signing of the Paris Peace Accord on Cambodia in 1991. In the late 80s, there were beginnings of peace negotiation between parties involved in a long civil war in Cambodia. The meetings in Jakarta was called Jakarta Interim Meeting, and this led to the convening of the Paris Conference on Cambodia, and this eventually led to the signing of the Paris Peace Accord on Cambodia in 1991. Then the United Nations organized the first ever peacekeeping operation, and it was in Cambodia. And Indonesia played a very prominent role because Indonesia was the co-chair with France of that Paris Conference on Cambodia. The UN organized that election, and Indonesia sent a big component in the UN force. 16,000 blue helmets intervened in Cambodia to ensure peace, to ensure that the election took place smoothly. So Cambodian people are very grateful to Indonesia for having played this role in bringing back peace, in laying the ground for a democratic system, because Cambodia has gone through terrible tragedies. You have heard about the Khmer Rouge, that Maoist regime that killed nearly 1/3 of the population. It was followed by a civil war where Vietnam invaded Cambodia under Pol Pot. Pol Pot was supported by China. So this has led to the first war between two communist countries, Vietnam and Cambodia. And it was a war by proxy that Cambodian from different factions fight against each other, but actually on behalf of China and on behalf of Vietnam. And Vietnam was supported by the Soviet Union. But at the end of the Cold War, the Soviet Union was no longer interested in supporting Vietnam, in waging the war in Cambodia. And this was the main reason why the big powers decided to sign a peace treaty, which is an international treaty in theory still valid, but in practice it has been violated, because the peace treaty has stated that Cambodia should be a democracy, a liberal and pluralist democracy, which is not the case. So I want to come to the current situation in Cambodia. Mr. Hun Sen, the current prime minister, has been in power for 38 years. I think he is the longest serving political leader in the world. Maybe there are 2 African dictators who have been in power for such a long period, but in Asia, definitely, Cambodia has the longest serving political leader in the world, in Asia. Mr. Hun Sen came to power first through a foreign military intervention. It was the Vietnamese intervention who put Mr. Hun Sen in place. Then it was under this communist regime for more than 10 years until the UN intervened, as I said at the beginning. When the UN intervened and organized this election, the first ever free and fair elections, Mr. Hun Sen and the communists lost. And there were democratic forces who came to power in 1993. We formed a coalition government. I was part of that coalition government. I was Minister of Finance. And we reformed the system to make it more democratic. But Mr. Hun Sen, that former communist, or even worse, former Khmer Rouge, with his culture of violence, of impunity, he did not accept the result of that election. He staged a coup d'etat, a bloody coup d'etat in 1997, and he seized all the power, and he eliminated his competitors. And most important, he set up an electoral commission which organized, and I would say which manipulate all the subsequent elections. And it is why he managed to stay in power until now, in violation of the Paris Peace Agreement on Cambodia, of which Indonesia is a co-chair. And more recently, we had election that is flawed with many irregularities. But even so, the opposition that I led succeeded in winning nearly half of the popular vote, exactly 44% of the popular vote. And everybody knows that had the election been more transparent, the opposition would have won. So Mr. Hun Sen knows that the opposition, the democratic opposition, is very, very powerful with a strong support of the people. And he managed to discard the opposition from subsequent elections. So in 2017, the regime disbanded the opposition party, which I was the president, called Cambodia national election, National Rescue Party. And the following year, in 2018, there was an election without opposition. And Mr. Hun Sen managed to win 100% of the seats at the National Assembly. So this is really a fake election with one party, the ruling party, managing to collect or to win all the seats at the National Assembly. And the last election, the following election, which is still due to take place this year in July, exactly in 2 months, there was another opposition party which was reactivated with the all element of the opposition that was disbanded. It's like in Thailand. In Thailand, when the military disbanded one opposition party, the Democrats form another opposition party under a new name. This is the same in Cambodia. The new opposition party is called the Candlelight Party. And the Candlelight Party was expected to win this election. And the regime used another trick. It was an administrative and bureaucratic trick to prevent the opposition from filing candidates. This time, the regime did not disband, did not dissolve the party, but it used another trick. It was to prevent the opposition from filing candidates. So now we cannot file candidates, meaning that in 2 months, the regime will again win 100% of the seats at the National Assembly. So this is a fake election. So my appeal to Indonesia is to help restore the democratic process that has derailed. Indonesia and all the other signatories of the Paris Peace Agreement on Cambodia, you do not have only the right, but it is your obligation to ensure that this international treaty be respected. And Cambodian Democrats look up to Indonesia as a model of democracy. We admire Indonesia. We hope that Indonesia could take the lead in promoting democracy in this region, in our region. Because actually, there is another model which we reject. It is the Chinese model. Mr. Hun Sen, our dictator, has sided with China. China has become an outpost. Cambodia has become an outpost for China. China has built a military bases in Cambodia, which is a threat to the security and the stability of the region. Many countries in the region, such as Vietnam, such as the Philippines, are very concerned about China's expansionism. The conflict in the South China Sea is the subject of concern. So it can increase tension in the region. I think Indonesia also feel concerned with this potential conflict. So you can ask, why does Cambodia side with China? It's a matter of financial assistance because of human rights violation by the regime. The West has taken sanctions against Mr. Hun Sen, and there has been reduction in financial assistance, in trade privileges. It is why Mr. Hun Sen has to turn to China to compensate for the reduction in Western aid. But this is not the main reason. The main reason is that Mr. Hun Sen, as a dictator, has adopted the Chinese model. Chinese model for society and for the government. The Chinese model for government, for an autocratic regime to continue to rule a country is more and more sophisticated means to control the population and to repress, to crack down on anybody or any group who are critical of the regime. So Mr. Hun Sen is now implementing this system, Chinese system, including, as you have seen, in the social media, there is restriction in the use of social media. The access is limited as in China. We are really following China's model. So it is not really a matter of financial assistance, but it is a matter of survival for the regime. An autocratic regime in Cambodia has to be modeled on China's regime. So it is an illusion to hope that the West can put pressure on Mr. Hun Sen regime to make it distance himself from China. He will never distance himself from China because it is a matter of life and death. The survival of the regime forbid any liberalization, because if he liberalized the regime, if he accept to organize a real election, he will lose. He will lose power. And power for Mr. Hun Sen, like in Malaysia, we have heard, power with some dictator, the corrupt dictator, is impunity. If Mr. Hun Sen is no longer prime minister, he will face justice. He will be jailed like some previous prime minister in Malaysia. So he has to stick to power and to use all means to remain in power. It is why his regime becomes more and more brutal. He kills people, he arrests people, he forces people into exile. So this increased repression, I think, needs international reaction. And in our region, Indonesia is well placed to use all legal and peaceful means to push and to force Mr. Hun Sen to accept the existence of an opposition and to accept the organization of real elections with the supervision of international forces, at least international monitors, like in 1993, when Mr. Hun Sen lose power through a democratic election. So it is why we believe that Indonesia can help restore democracy in Cambodia. Thank you.
Before I do a short recap, di sini ada berapa yang akan terbantu kalau saya terjemahin ke bahasa Indonesia? Atau semuanya nyaman dengan bahasa Inggris? All good? Okay, thank you so much, Sam, for your generous sharing of experience and also a keen analysis, a sharp analysis about the relationship between China and the US and what they have over, the kind of power they have over the region. And how social media, as Ross has also explained in the beginning, is part and parcel and instrumental in either maintaining democracy, or it could also at some points create polarizations across young voters, which Made Supriyatma will be talking about after. Your insights about the Chinese-US relationship struck a chord with me because studies about what kind of influence the Chinese have over Southeast Asia is understudied. And it's very important to unpack because along with that tension is how much aid and support is given towards strengthening the democratic agenda in Southeast Asia. And we thank you for using Indonesia as a benchmark. It certainly provides some optimism on our side because we feel that things are not as rosy as what can be portrayed in some international media, which Made will be talking about. Thank you again for your kind and generous time and for being willing to be here today. I'm going to go to the next speaker. Made Supriyatna is a visiting fellow in the Indonesia Studies program at ICA's Yusuf Ishak Institute at Singapore. He currently edited the book, The Jokowi Prabowo Elections 2.0 with Hui Yu Fung, which talks about the role of video campaigning, about cyber armies, about the role of media, digital media, and the internet in supporting or hindering democratic participation. Made, time and place is yours. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mbak Inaya. Good morning, everybody. It's really to be really honored to be with you this morning. I think I have a presentation here, slightly different from what probably Mbak Inaya is talking about, but we can go there here and there in this presentation. Let me begin in what is elections mean for us in Indonesia. Actually, it is not really unfamiliar with us. We have a long tradition of elections. Even in the in the lower level, at the village level, we have always have an election to elect our village leader, for example, and elections have taken place only 5 years after the War of Independence. And even the new order authoritarian regime sought legitimacy through elections, even though they were fraudulent. And elections, I may say, it's become a norm for us. So we survived the authoritarian government, and now we have democracy through elections. The difference is that whether elections really become a vehicles for people's consultation to elect rulers and policymakers that will determine the destiny of the people in the whole country. And then do the people really have the best choice to elect the candidates that will serve the public interest as much as possible? I have a new, this is, I think, the beginning of my research that I want to present you. It's about the elites captures and how we, in the last 10 years at least, in my notes, that we are really moving not toward the people, but toward the elites. And this is going to be our political parties. Not really much based on people. As you see that a lot of political parties here still has the roots in the New Order era, like Golkar and Hanura, and even some Democrats, which is Golkar has been divided into so many political parties, Nasdem, including Prabowo's Gerindra. So you see a lot of political parties actually, especially the biggest one, the big one, are the remnants of the New Order. Even I consider PDIP, which is in power right now, it's well, still have some roots. At least the people who manage the party are also educated or have their political program or political agenda during in the New Order regime. Let's just start with the just very short timeline. In 1995, we have a multi-party elections with many ideological platforms, and the parties reach to the masses determines its political strength. And Indonesian society has become hyper-politicized at the time, and that's caused a widespread anti-party attitude, especially among the intellectuals. And of course, the military. And the other day, I have a talk with suddenly I forgot the name of Australian political scientist who wrote about Golkar. And he said that, well, the idea of Golkar actually not coming from the military, that a lot of us perceive that it's coming from the military. It's actually come from Sukarno. And President Sukarno sought a middle way by offering a typical Indonesian representative system, namely functional groups, which is not a political party, but in his imaginations that the groups of workers, the group of intellectuals, a group of religious people, forming a groups together, represent a representative in one body. So they will talk about, they will determine the future of this country. Sukarno didn't implement this idea, and instead, the military caught it in order to create the functional groups, which they named Golkar, which was established in 1964. And then we have the New Order military regime, and as we know from the history, Golongan Karya, or the functional groups, becomes well, they refuse to call themselves as a political party, but this is the tools with function similar to political party used by Suharto in order to stay in power. And the main characteristic of the New Order was to exclude the masses from the political process, and then turn into the floating masses. And the elections become a ritual in order to give a legitimacy every 5 years. And the New Orders was supported by three pillars: the military, the bureaucracy, and the Golkar. I think you know very familiar with this. And political differences were resolved among the elites of these three pillars. And of course, Suharto, with Suharto being the decider. So yeah, you have a lot of conflicts. I think if you remember, the Sudarmonos, the head of Golkar, in conflict with Beni Murdani, the commander of the army, and then Suharto played the game in the middle, and he decides who stays, who's go, and something like that. The system, however, we have to admit that brought stability to the country, but without control and accountability of the elites. And then in the post-authoritarian era, political party grew rapidly after the collapse of the New Order. We have 48 parties in the first election after the New Order in 1999. Polarizations, fortunately, is not based on ideology. Well, there's some ideology, but but not so. So, for example, the Muslim say that, well, we have Islamic ideology, but I don't think it's as extreme as it is in other countries. The parties basically have the same platform in terms of economic policy or how to manage the country. I think until now, I think we have a consensus as Indonesia that we need economic growth, we need development, we need to continue what we already have. I don't want to destroy that. That's I think a good consensus as a nation. And the institutionalization of the party is very weak, except for the Islamic Party, Partai Keadilan Sejahtera. I don't think, well, of course, in some level, PDIP also has quiet, strong institutionalization. But other parties, not so much. Yeah, they are changing and they are aligned with each other, not on the similar platform, but of this similar interest. So, and most parties rely on the party leaders who are actually the strong women and men. Megawati Soekarno Putri has been in power more than 25 years. Less a little bit from Hun Sen, I guess, in Indonesian politics. And parties, political party, immediately become tools for the elites here, most of whom were born out of the new order. And I will call this phenomenon as elite captures. A lot of people wrote about this already, actually, which elites control political parties in order to gain access to state resources for the greatest interest of themselves. I think most of the political parties right now is led by strong men or strong women in terms of Megawati. But most of them, but not all of them, but most of them are very, very rich and also has a roots in a new order. The Golkar Party, for example, Airlangga Hartarto, was his father used to serve as an industry minister under Suharto. And then Prabowo, of course, his son-in-law, former son-in-law, who's Suharto. And then Nasdem, I think, is coming from Golkar. Democrat, most of the Democrats, I think, also coming from as a roots in Golkar, so on and so on. Next. And then the Jokowi presidency, what we see right now is deepening captures by the elites. I will go a little bit academics in here by referring to the studies that has done about the elites in Southeast Asia, especially, some people coined the terms of oligarchy, Jeffrey Winters, Dick Robinson, and Fedi Hadis, among example. And then a lot of people now thinking about the dynasty, bossism, or cacique. But there is almost no explanation on mechanism on how elites are capturing or recapturing the state and its political system. When Jokowi was elected, he was seen as a reformer with little or no ties to Jakarta elites. And it was only later that people found that he's actually become an oligarch of himself. Yeah. Change in politics came in 2016 when Jokowi has to face large demonstration. I think this is a really milestone for Indonesian politics when Jokowi changed course. He doesn't believe in mass-based anymore because of the how almost 1 million people flooded Jakarta in protesting Jakarta governor at that time, Basuki Cahayapurnama. And Jokowi is basically a technocratic populist leader. I read about this. I think I like the term, but I forgot to put the reference in it. With a deep developmentalism ideology in his mind. Yeah, developmentalism, I think, is also the liberal market in his mind, makes him the entirely protege of the new order thinking. And he views political stability as very important for carrying out infrastructure development. And he needs to silence the masses, just like in the new order. Yeah. On the other hand, he understands democracy very well and how it works. He needs democracy, and he's very good at gaming how democracies work. So he's very good at dividing the electorate. You probably remember during the election in 2014, especially in 2019, the division of Indonesian societies was very, very deep. And then at the end of the day, after he won, then he embraced his opponents and make him his defense minister. He was never against democracy, but once in power, he negotiated his way to secure his position and align himself to the elite. Hold on. And then dynamics of the elite structures and how does this happen? I think we need to understand this, because a lot of people right now talking about oligarchy, and oligarchy in Indonesia become a buzzword. But if we ask people who is oligarchs, and nobody knows. But I think we need to do some close examination of how the dynamics of the elites, or the oligarch, or bosses, or whatever you want to call it, how it works, and who gets what. An oligarch or a political boss has power on its own sectors, his own jurisdictions, or to borrow a term from John Seidel, bailiwicks. The bailiwicks has become the domain of the elite, and it's not necessarily geographical areas. I think the next speaker from the Philippines, I think I need probably we will hear a little bit about how the elites grew up in spatial geographical space, a province, and start from there capturing the national politics. In Indonesia, it didn't work. It doesn't work that way. It most likely a slice of economic sectors, such as garlic importers, milk distributors, and some things like that, until the giant things like mining, who got the minings, who got the forest concessions. And yeah, I think I interviewed a lot of presidential candidates, a lot of people in a presidential candidate right now, and I want to know where the money is come from. The money is actually come from to the campaigns, come from this kind of people who spend 1 billion, 5 billion rupiah, goes to the candidates that they want, either in presidential campaigns or in legislative campaigns. So this is how they by influence. And this guy has been around since the New Order, most of them. So nothing has changed. I think if we want to look about the election, we need to look to the elite. This is my point. And if we look at the elites, we need to look how they behave and how much money that they spend, how much money that they distribute to the elected officials of their choice. I think I will stop there. Hope in the questions, answers and question session, we will go deeper, including the behavior of the voters in Indonesia. Thank you very much, Pranay.
Thank you so much, Bulimade. The important point from Made's presentation is about how democratic spaces can become an arena for elite consolidation. So it's really important to be vigilant about the kinds of politician we're voting into the system, and whether or not he or she owes to a strong social basis that supports the democratic agenda. On that note, I would like to move on to our next speaker, who will talk about the Philippines. Professor Maria Ella Atienza is Professor of Political Sciences in University of Philippines in Diliman. She is also the former chair at the Department of Political Sciences and co-convener of the program on social and political change at the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies, known for their staunch support for democracy and alternative development policies. Ella, time and place is yours. You have 15 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Inaya. I hope people can hear me clearly. So good morning to everyone. It's almost noontime here in Quezon City in the Philippines. So thank you to FISIP UI for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to connect and work with colleagues and friends from Indonesia, particularly FISIP in UI. I have met quite a few from scholars from UI since I was a graduate student from the University of the Philippines. So I'm grateful for the invitation to join a panel of esteemed scholars who are comparing and discussing some of the similarities as well as differences in terms of electoral politics and the prospects of democracy in Southeast Asia. So I thank Ria for actually giving me a title for my presentation today. It's actually a revision of, or a slight revision of an article I wrote for Asian Survey in 2020, Consolidation of Power and the Challenges of the Reform Agenda in the Philippines. Actually, in that article, I talked about the midterm elections and the implications of the midterm elections in 2019 in the Philippines. But looking back at the title, it's still appropriate when talking about the most recent elections in the Philippines. But of course, the last elections occurred in May 9, 2022. So I have a year to reflect on my initial comments and some of the observations that political scientists in the Philippines, particularly from the University of the Philippines in my department and the Center for Integrative and Development Studies have actually come up with and look back at some of the lessons and some of the continuing challenges for democratization in the Philippines. So without much further ado, let's go to the next slide. Very briefly in this presentation, I'll be discussing the context of electoral politics in the Philippines. And so I'll be discussing some general assessment about Philippine democracy because I'll be going back to that in terms of trying to explain why the 2022 elections turned out the way it did. What are the general features of Philippine elections? And then the 2022 elections, what are the continuities as well as the new context, the differing campaigning styles that became very prominent from 2021 to 2022, particularly for the top two candidates for president, the results and the implications, as well as lessons, challenges, and opportunities. So basically, many of the things I'll be talking about are actually drawn from, next slide please, from some of the publications that my colleagues and I did for the past 3 years. Can we go to the next slide please? Yeah, we had a project last year, UP sa Halalan, meaning UP in the elections, and you can look at our website, Twitter, and Facebook for more details about our analysis of the 2022 elections. And then for our research outputs, next slide, please. In 2020, we published an assessment of the 1987 Philippine Constitution. One was published before the lockdown and the pandemic, but we also managed to have a follow-up publication updating our initial assessment of the 1987 Philippine Constitution. This was funded by the Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assessment, International Idea, and published under the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies. And next slide, please. We continue our studies not only on Philippine democracy in general, but also in particular Philippine political parties and elections. And you can see some of our most recent policy briefs and policy monographs focusing on elections, voter education, political party reform, and other suggested changes in the electoral system and other areas of Philippine democracy by looking at the website of the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies. So let me go first to, next slide please, to the major context of Philippine democracy since 1987 when we adopted the post-EDSA, post-people power constitution of the Philippines. So in terms of pre-pandemic assessment of Philippine politics and democracy, using our internal criteria, and you can look at our framework more exhaustively in our publication, we found out that there's only thin compliance with our internal criteria used in the performance assessment. Many of the technical requirements in the Constitution have been met in terms of setting up mandated institutions, holding processes such as elections, and enacting necessary laws and actions. But in terms of thick or substantial compliance, in terms of meeting the goals set in the Constitution, it's still one thing. And furthermore, some laws mandated by the Constitution have not yet been enacted. And we have noticed a growing trend of executive dominance highlighted at that time by the, not just by the Duterte administration, but previous presidents. Next slide, please. And in terms of external criteria, the general assessments of democratic institutions, although notable progress has been made, there is still limited or very thin compliance in terms of promoting substantial democratization, decentralization, social justice, human rights and gender equality, peace and conflict resolution, and economic development. Next slide, please. Now, when the pandemic hit the Philippines in early 2020, we have identified some threats and opportunities in the democratization process in the Philippines. Areas that we already identified as problematic in the original assessment are indeed continuing to be so, and even areas where positive performance was recognized in the assessment are being challenged as a result of the pandemic. But despite the challenges, we noted some positive innovations, particularly in the areas of the judiciary, local governments, and citizenship that could provide inspiration for more institutional policies and programs that could improve performance on key goals of the Constitution, such as in the areas of decentralization and autonomy, as well as social justice. Next slide, please. In terms of the general features of Philippine elections, for those not very familiar with elections in the Philippines, we have a pluralist first past the post system with our own version of proportional representation. 20% of our members of the House of Representatives are elected through what we call a party list system, which was originally supposed to promote smaller, more progressive parties, but now they have been taken over by elites and political families. Our national and local elections are held simultaneously every 3 years, although presidential and vice presidential elections are held every 6 years. We have established a multi-party system, but we have very weak political parties because it's more personality-oriented and patronage politics are dominant rather than programmatic politics. Elections, both national and local, while the Constitution said that they are supposed to be free, competitive, and fair, are not actually completely free, competitive, and fair with the dominance of political dynasties and the oligarchy of the Philippines. Generally, through succeeding elections, Filipinos turn out very much during elections, but if we look at the various classifications of citizens in terms of political participation, we can classify majority of Filipinos as voting specialists because as after every election, they usually do not support or participate in many of the other areas for political participation, such as organizing, lobbying, and joining various organizations. Next slide, please. What are the continuities and new context in the 2022 election? Definitely, we still see the dominance of personality-oriented politics and big political families and oligarchs. But the pandemic has brought in or highlighted the discrepancies in terms of class dynamics, human rights violations, and some organizations, grassroots efforts were seen during the pandemic to try to fill in the limitations or failures of the national and local governments to deal with the pandemic and the consequences of the lockdown. We have also seen the intensification of the influence of social media, fake news, and polarization, and many political personalities and administration candidates have been supported by influencers using mass media to support or promote fake news and attack the opposition. The 2022 elections also saw the intensification of attacks on the opposition. So it was also the crossroads in the democratization process, and we have seen further democratic erosion with a lot of attacks against the opposition and many groups that are deemed anti-administration. We had a new term, red tagging, wherein many people who criticize the government are immediately identified as supporters of the insurgency and threatened by the new anti-terrorism law. However, we also, the 2022 elections also saw possibilities for new social movements and progressive grassroots and coalition politics. Next slide, please. In the 2022 campaigns, we saw two contrasting styles in the campaigning strategy and supporters of the two major national candidates or teams, leading to the results. In terms of resources and strategy, we saw two versions of unity and messaging, and we saw traditional versus social media, social movement tactics. For instance, the Bongbong Marcos and Sara Duterte campaign displayed the use of a lot of resources, carefully planned advertisements, strict themes, and carefully selected messages, very simple messages of unity and advancement. They use songs that reminisce the new society of Ferdinand Marcos set to new music. Their rallies were very organized. They carefully planned public appearances of their candidates. They shunned the presidential and vice presidential debate. They used YouTube, TikTok, and other social media campaigns instead of participating in debate. They were a lot of reported incidents of vote buying and a lot of buses and food for people who will attend the campaigns. And there were also a lot of money being poured by business people for the campaign. In contrast, the Robredo campaign began as a very small group, mainly of traditional opposition, but it gained support in the latter part of 2021. And more and more sectors joined in. Volunteers using their own money and raising their own funds, prepared their own posters, placards, campaign strategies, and they brought their resources to be shared with others. various groups within the Leni Robredo campaign argued and debated about the messaging, campaign strategies, and how to get more supporters. It also offered people of other political colors to join the rallies and campaigns. And they presented a different version of unity, in contrast with unity, the very general, very simplistic definition of unity and toxic positivity of the Bongbong Marcos campaign. Rallies became opportunities for host localities or communities to showcase their own culture. In a sense, the Robredo campaign was being run mainly as a social movement, a new social movement campaign with all its positives and negatives. Very decentralized, very grassroots, and a lot of discussion. In terms of supporters, the Bongbong Marcos Duterte campaign attracted more local politicians and officials who openly endorsed and campaigned for the tandem. And they come from different sectors. And if we look at the surveys, they cut through the different regions and provinces of the Philippines. However, when we look at the campaign of the Bongbong Marcos and Duterte team, there's also a divide in the placement of supporters during rallies. There's a VIP section for politicians, friends, and supporters cordoned off, while the general public are seen or placed at the back. In the end, the total votes for the Marcos Duterte Jr. led to more than 31 million votes, whereas the Robredo Pangilinan campaign only got 15 million or more votes. However, we see the diversity in terms of the types of people and types of sectors that have participated in the two campaigns. In the Robredo Pangilinan campaign, we see religious groups, LGBTQ plus groups, professionals, artists, academics, different sectors of the Philippine left, farmers groups, fisher folks, drivers, indigenous people, civil society groups, and even celebrities and influencers. So people who normally do not get involved and do not go together in various campaigns started working together, although based on observations, their grassroots campaigning and household campaigning came a little bit late. So we definitely see in terms of the results, the triumph of patronage and magnified both at the national level and the local level. We see the very strong bonds among traditional local politicians who continue to support the Duterte and the Marcos and Duterte campaign. Next slide, please. So the results, this is a snapshot of the results. People see that, of course, the surveys already predicted that Marcos and Duterte will win, but you can look at the 15 million either from a glass half empty or half full. Given that the opposition was very weak and they started very late, we can say that the 15 million is actually indicative of what can be done if people have started very early on and people have mobilized earlier than what was actually seen. Next slide, please. So in terms of lessons from the May 2022 elections, definitely disinformation and organized attacks on the opposition have been mentioned as the primary causes, but based on further analysis, they only represent one of the many causes of the results of the election. Based on our analysis, definitely there's failure on the part of the post-1986 people power formal democracy in the Philippines to actually deliver on its promises and to institutionalize democratic processes and principles. We have also noted the weakness and factionalization of the progressive forces. It's only here in 2022 that they worked together to support the candidacy of the former vice president. The Marcoses' long-planned rehabilitation and re-entry on Philippine politics started since they returned to the Philippines in the 1990s. And aside from the convictions for graft and corruption, they were not imprisoned. We also noted this should be civic education and grassroots organizing. Next slide, please, and my last slide. So what are the challenges and opportunities in Philippine elections and democracy? In terms of challenges, definitely money, political families, and patronage politics is still dominant. There's increasing polarization and proliferation of fake news in various media. We see now, and we're now fighting the dangers of historical revisionism and further weakening of democratic institutions and processes. Until now, there's a weak and very threatened opposition parties and left forces. There's still weak grassroots organizing and voters' education. But what are the opportunities since 2022? Non-traditional campaigning focusing on issues and programs beyond personality seem to be more effective. There's the importance of creating very creative local campaigns. In campaigning, the personal is political. You have to make the campaigns relevant to people's personal struggles, especially during the pandemic. We have increasingly seen the relevance of media, the academe, interest groups, civil society groups, sectoral groups, including the youth, in voters' education and fact-checking in both social and traditional media. And of course, it's important to work for and pushing for the many electoral and party system reform proposals that are already being discussed since 1987. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ella. Terima kasih. That was a fascinating presentation and no recap needed. I'm going to invite Huria now as a discussant to speak in response to all the speakers, especially in the points of comparative analyses across the 4 cases. And we have 10 minutes for you before we enter Q&A. I would like to remind the audience to scan the QR code on the table. That way you can ask questions that we'll curate and have all the speakers answer before the end of the session. Huria, time and place is yours.
Thank you, Inaya. Good morning, everyone, and also all the speakers, the distinguished speakers. I only have 10 minutes, and I think from the presentations from all 4 speakers, we can actually agree that as for today, we are witnessing not only the stagnancy of democratization, but also a democratic recreation across Southeast Asia. But let's go back to the last few years. I think with the success of mass uprisings across Southeast Asia since late 1980s, we already saw the collapse of authoritarian regimes and a new wave of democratizations, especially in new democracies like Philippines and also Thailand and Indonesia as the latecomer of democracy in 1998. But the struggle for democratization was indeed hard and bloody. In Indonesia, it takes a lot of social, economic, and political costs to have 1998 reformasi. But the honeymoon period where we can enjoy civil and political liberties is quite short. For the past decade, we have been witnessing the regression of democracy across Southeast Asia and also in Indonesia. So let's break the fact of the political situation in Southeast Asia. I think despite the success of democratization movement in Southeast Asia, this region is still a fertile ground for authoritarianism. And there is a full range of authoritarianism that we can see in this region, from communist dictatorship in Vietnam and Laos, military dictatorship in Myanmar, absolute monarchy in Brunei, capitalist dictatorship in Cambodia, one-party rule in Singapore, and also patronage-based democracy in Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And even compared to African region, the democratic development in this region is very weak and lagging. And for example, an assessment from Freedom House shows that democratization process in Southeast Asia remain fragile and often fluctuated between democracy and dictatorship. And the second feature of Southeast Asian democracy is that these democracies exhibit one common characteristic, that at the end of each transition stand the institutionalization of the model of representative democracy, but minus representation. Okay, next. Okay, from the picture in the slide, we can see that there is a mixture of democracy and autocracy in Southeast Asia. And some scholars even describe this region as an Asian-style democracy, or some would say liberal democracy or Confucian democracy. But there is this also new scholarship. It might be a sophisticated authoritarian regime in Southeast Asia. Next. Even though each speakers already describe and present the challenges and also features of democratic features and also authoritarian features in this country, we can see some common issues in Southeast Asia. The first one is the deterioration of civil liberties, especially freedom of expression. Almost in all countries in Southeast Asia, we can see a tightened control of online content and increased censorship, as well as severe legal penalties for those who accuse of violating the freedom of expression. In Indonesia, for example, Indonesian authorities blocked some online platforms such as Yahoo, PayPal, etc., that failed to register under a new legal regime for electronic services, which require companies to remove content that the Indonesian government deems problematic. And we can also see that it also occurred in social media, Instagram, Twitter, and also Facebook. Like, you cannot easily post anything in your social media account because anyone can report it, and even the Ministry of Communication and Information in Indonesia can ask Facebook and Instagram, to remove your posts. And also in Cambodia, as Mr. Ramsey explained, the government has sought to consolidate control over the country's connection to the international internet. And the same situation also happened in Myanmar, where the authorities cut off mobile internet for over 1 million people, especially in parts of Rakhine State, the area where the military has conducted crackdowns. The government also launched a campaign of censorship and surveillance, targeting activists and journalists who covered the Rohingya crisis. And to some extent, it has also happened in Indonesia. Some of my colleagues, for example, who become initiators for the protest movements during the 2019 protests against the revision of anti-corruption law. Yeah, they have their phone hijacked. They have their they experience persecutions, online persecutions, and also they are under surveillance. And in Thailand, we can also see that some activists and journalists also sentenced in prison under the charge of violating the country's laws. And apart from the deterioration of civil liberties, we can also see the regularity of flawed election. In Indonesia, for instance, as Blimade already explains, we do have seemingly free and fair competitions. But we can also see that the arena for competition is shrink because it is dominated by political dynasty, it is dominated by elites, and it is also dominated by new order cronies. In the elections across Southeast Asia, I think there is also a similarity in which there is an influx of disinformations, false news, hoax, and black campaign, which is not only being disseminated among voters, but it is fabricated and amplified by the so-called consultant and buzzer industry. And I think it is also the same, not only in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Thailand, and also in other countries. The mobilization of populism and identity politics also one of the key features of elections in Southeast Asia. In Indonesia, we can see the rise of identity politics since the 2017 Jakarta elections. And there is also the problem of entrenched patronage politics and political dynasty, which hinder the practice of substantial democracy through the elections. And there is also the problem of autocratic politics, in which technocratic measures is used by the government to silence public noise and also political opponents, as also mentioned by Mr. Ramsey. And the adoption of enforcement of new restrictive legislation also become a feature of Southeast Asian politics today. But I want to also raise about some positive developments in Southeast Asia's politics. For instance, in terms of gender equality, we can see some progress, in which women's political participation and leadership is improved, despite slow progress and enduring structural barriers. And even in some countries like Vietnam, Singapore, and Laos, there's a significant increase in the number of women's representation in parliaments. But in electoral autocracies like the Philippines and also in Indonesia, the number of women representation in the parliaments remain drop, and with the current revision of PKPU, internal regulation from the electoral management bodies, we might see a declining of women's leadership, women's participation in the election and also in the parliament for the 2024 elections. Next. Another positive developments, I think, that we can see across Southeast Asia is the rising digital activism. And it's quite balanced, because we are also facing rising digital authoritarianism, but on the other hand, we can see the emergence of digital activism across Southeast Asia that gives us optimism that civil society can still be a challenge towards, can be a challenge for the authoritarian regime. And the last slide. Okay, maybe we can start to discuss, rather than discussing whether democracy can survive in Southeast Asia, we can assess how strong or how is the quality of authoritarian regime in Southeast Asia, how authoritarianism can survive and in Southeast Asia. One of the study from sorry, I forgot the name, but the study assessed in which the authoritarian regime can possess some indicators and mimics the fundamental attributes of democracy. And the study concludes that the situation of Southeast Asian electoral politics today might suggest an underlying trend of sophisticated authoritarianism, in which the autocrats use innovative methods to mimic some attributes of democracy, to adopt electoral democracy, not because they are in crisis, but because the adoption of electoral democracy enables this authoritarian and autocrats to maintain their grip on power, even when allowing people to vote. So it looks like we are witnessing the resilience of authoritarianism in Southeast Asia instead of witnessing the regression of democracy. With this, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Huria, that was excellent. All the key points made by each speakers were recapped very well. And I think all of the speakers share the concerns of how elite consolidation affects democratic participation and civic space. We have a lot of questions actually on Slido, but I will curate one question. I'm going to invite all speakers in the order of their position in the presentation. Ross, Mr. Saimrenzi, Blimade, and Prof. Ella, and then Huria. What are your thoughts on making the organization of progressive forces more coherent, specifically those critical of elite consolidation and its destructive effects on pro-democratic civic participation? So how to make progressive forces stronger, especially those who are perhaps now experiencing persecution. Ross, time and place is yours.
Right, thank you. I guess the first thing that comes to mind is one of the big challenges that Malaysia has faced, but also clearly in Indonesia, is the fact that political parties tend to voters look at political parties and see them all as largely having the same policies around environment, education, the economy, public policy broadly, transport, whatever it might be. And they differentiate parties largely around how they see the role, how parties would view the role of Islam in the state. So political parties that stand for progressive reforms, such as the Future Forward Party, has seemingly made a lot of inroads, not only as anti-authoritarianism, but also to promote progressive issues. And so, can that occur in other countries in Southeast Asia, or will they remain just vehicles for individuals and certain forms of political party patronage? And how do we create new parties that at least stand clearly for a particular issue?
Thank you so much, Ross. All the best for you. Over to Mr. Saimrenzi.
We have to make a difference between big countries and small countries. A big country like Indonesia is less subject to foreign influence. But a small country like Cambodia is very subject to foreign influence because the country is dependent on the rest of the world in terms of assistance, in terms of trade, and even in terms of recognition. A small country like Cambodia needs legitimacy. And if we don't understand the system very well, the rest of the world can confer legitimacy, and it allows a dictatorial regime to continue to engage in illegal activities, in business as usual, where they can get a lot of resources to maintain the whole system. But if we realize that this is a illegal regime based on fake elections, and even it's a mafia state which lead the country, then we must deprive that the regime, we must contest its legitimacy, and it cannot last very long.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Blimade.
Yeah, I think across Southeast Asia, I think we see the old powers coming back. In Philippines, we saw that clearly with the election of the Marcos Jr. And even in Indonesia, of course, we have a very exciting, 10 years ago, we have a very exciting candidate which inspire all of the people. And suddenly we feel that, what is that? Oh, if you grew up at the bank of the river, grew up poor or grew up as an ordinary people, you can be a president too. So that's kind of imagination. But then after seeing what's going on in the last 9 years, we become less optimistic than before. And even in Thailand, you see, after the junta, you see the results of the Pheu Thai and also the Move Forward Party. It's coming, the leader of this party is the old power, Thaksin, and also you see the leader of the Praja, the leader of the Move Forward Party, Pita, yeah. Graduated from Harvard. It's a very grew up in a very privileged situation. Not less in Myanmar, which I know only from the people that I met in Singapore, to the very expensive or high-end malls, and a lot of people coming over there just to shop and to spend their money on luxuries. Yeah, I think we see this across the region, and it is worrying. I think we need to start thinking not only about the democratic regression, but how this old power gain their access back to the state and take over the resources for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Blimade. Ella, are you still with us?
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Inaya. That's a very important question. And the Philippine progressive sector has been facing a lot of challenges since 1986. First, they are so factionalized and they also fight against each other. They support different presidential candidates every election, but the Duterte administration since 2016 has seemed to galvanize efforts for these progressive sectors to come together, agree on certain issues, and at least larger portions of the Philippine left and progressive sector were able to agree on certain points during the past 2022 elections, and even now with issues related to human rights, fighting, increasing militarization, and red tagging and attacks against anti-administration candidates, there seems to be more openings for moving forward, not just concentrating on coming together during elections, but focusing on joint efforts to focus on more pro-people, more democratic campaigns. And in the Philippines, it's interesting how this will move forward, knowing the very strong challenges where you have a lot of resources on the part of the oligarchy and the political families. At the formal level, at the national level, the party list system has now been dominated by political elites instead of the progressive sector. But one positive area where the progressive sector can start really mobilizing, getting support is genuinely working at the grassroots sector. And there are a few successful cases of the progressive sector mobilizing, organizing, and creating grassroots movement at the local level. And they also manage to establish strong organizations that can also present candidates for local politics. So there are difficulties, but there could be possible openings for the Philippine progressive sector to come together, but they cannot mobilize without strong grassroots and local support. So they should actually focus on that as well as the national electoral campaigning, particularly now when political elites in the country seem to be experiencing internal divisions and infighting. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ella. Please join me to applaud all speakers. Sorry, Huria, you first, and then I close. Sorry. Here you go.
Yeah, thank you, Inaya. To be honest, I don't have answers for your questions, but I think despite all the challenges, we can still have a hope, yeah, especially for the civil society. The civil society in Indonesia needs to consolidate themselves, even though it's not easy, given that, the situations is very challenging, with the polarization still be very prominent in electoral politics. And also there has been less and less democratic aid for civil society to work on various issues. But with all these challenges, I think we can do anything that that we can, and civil society can work together in their areas, yeah, in the electoral areas. For example, yeah, civil society activists from academics and civil society organizations are now working together to keep demanding the revisions of PKPU in order to maintain the progress in women's representation in Indonesia. So that is just one example where the work of civil society, the monitoring from civil society is still needed in order to safeguard democracy in the country. Thank you.
On that note, I would like to ask everyone to join me in applauding all of the excellent speakers today. Thank you so much for your insights, analyses, and also experience. One short note that at times legal formality and institutions that are designed to support the elections can be captured by elite interests. These include rules such as the anti-terrorism law in the Philippines and the electronic transaction law in Indonesia to curb, limit civic space and maneuvering. And on that note as well, Ella reminds us that local initiatives under the decentralization law and decentering and deconcentrating power on the level of everyday politics and direct engagement with grassroots communities could be key in creating a more coherent progressive force. Thank you so much for the support from Kurawal Foundation, without which we could not have gathered here today with all of the kind speakers. I wish you all health and wellness so that we can go on this very long journey together. Thank you so much. Lebih kurangnya minta maaf ya kalau ada salah kata. Assalamualaikum. Thank you.